Okay, hi all my friends. Um, did that work out? Yeah, okay. Alrighty, onward and upward to Esther Chapter 7 is where we're at, and I'd like to just start reading. Um, just as I've been reading the Bible and listening to other ministers and what have you, I'm like, well, definitely pray before you hear God's word always. Um, and I'm just wondering if I should be. Yeah, never mind. Just a fleeting thought, wondering if I should add more to all this or I should just read. So maybe I just keep reading and let the Holy Spirit talk to you and minister to you where you're at. I will maybe, put in a few things here and there. It was a fleeting thought. Okay, never mind. All right, so Esther sues for her own life and the life of her people. The king causes Hayman to be hanged on his own gallows. All right, so now she set up this banquet, and if you recall from the last chapter. So the king and Hayman came to banquet with Esther, the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, to perish. But if we had been sold for a bondsman and a bondwoman, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then King Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is he, that durst presume in his heart to do this thing, okay, against you and your people? And Esther said, The adversary, isn't that interesting to use the word adversary, okay? An enemy is this wicked Hayman. Then Hayman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king arose from the banquet of wine, and his wrath went into the palace garden. And Hayman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the palace of the banquet of wine, and Hayman was fallen upon the bed wherein Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, eunuchs, okay, said before the king, Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Hayman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Hayman. Then the king said, Hang him thereon. So they hanged Hayman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Chapter 8. Mordecai advanced. Ahasuerus grants to the Jews to defend themselves, Mordecai's honors and Jews' joy. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Hayman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out a golden scepter, towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, If it please the king, if I have found favor in his sight, the thing that seemed right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Hayman, the son of Hammedatha, an Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come into my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then King Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Hayman, and him that have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liked you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, and the writing which is written in the king's name, and seal with the king's ring may no man reverse. Then the king's scribe called at the time of the 3rd month, that is the month of Sivan. I love that they're putting all the names of the months. Okay. Sivan, and the 23rd day thereof, it was written according to all Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies, and the rulers of the provinces, which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, sent the letters by post on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. Wherein the kings granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, to cause to perish all the powers of the people and provinces that would assault them, both little ones, women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is in the month of Adar, the copy of the writing for the commandment to be given in every province was published to all the people, and that the Jews should be readied against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the post that rode upon the mule and the camels went out, being hastened and pressed upon by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in the royal apparel of the blue and white, with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city wherewithsoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews, the joy, the gladness, a feast, a good day, many of the people of the land became Jews. Many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Chapter 9. The Jews slay their enemies with the 10 sons of Hayman, 2 days of Purim made festival. Now, in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, then the king commanded, and his decree drew near to be put in execution in the day of the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, which was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had ruled over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in the cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rules of the provinces and lieutenants and the deputies and officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and the fame went out throughout all the provinces. Where was I? All the provinces, sorry. And the man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. And thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughtered and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace the Jews slew and destroyed 500 of them, and Pashanatha, Dalaphon, and Asphah, and Porthatha, Aladiah, and Alaridatha, and Parmishta, and Arizai, and Aridai, and Vajezatha, and the sons of Hayman, sons of Mediatha, enemy of Jews, slew they, but the spoil laid they not their hand. So they didn't touch it. On the day the number of those that were slain in Shushan, the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan in the palace, the 10 sons of Hayman, and what they've done in the rest of the king's provinces. Now what is thy petition, and what shall be granted thee? Of what is thy request further, and it shall be done. Then said Esther, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow according to this day's decree, and let Hayman 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. The king commanded it to be done, and it was done. They hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews were in the Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also the month of Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they had laid not their hands. And the Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together, stood for their lives for the rest of the enemies, and slew the foes 7,500, but they laid not their hands on the prey. 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the same rested they, and made the day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the walled towns made the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness, feasting, a good day, a sending of portions one to another. And Mordecai wrote of all of these things, sent out letters unto all the Jews that were in the province of the king Ahasuerus, both near and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same yearly. And I'm going to stop right there, because this is the almost the last chapter of Esther here, and I'll finish it at another time. We are going to be going into the book of Job, and just a quick word about Job. Job is a very frustrating book. It's full of, you learn about God and the adversary, who he is. You've got this man who has everything. He is a man of God. He loses everything and gets double portion at the end, and yet you still don't know why. Okay, and so for me, as you heard in my other video, I want to know the why, of things, and to my detriment sometimes. But anyway, it's going to be an interesting book to get into, and for you to hear and learn, from. And so anyway, that's coming up very soon. I've got just a few more verses in a very small chapter 10 with only 3 verses in it. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so very much. For thumbs up, like, bye.